Hey team, I want to give you some additional resources that you can use for the class. In the past, I have used the textbook Effective Grants Management by Deborah Ward. It's fairly old at this point, and it's expensive, difficult to get your hands on a physical copy, and it's not particularly comprehensive. It's more of an outline, and so I don't think it's worth the money to spend for the class. So I don't require it, but certainly if you want to get a copy, you can. But each week I'll go through a chapter with you. So we're going to just go through the first part, which really outlines what a grant manager does. And aside from the formal definition, I just want to point out that project administrator or administration is the same thing as a grant manager. So you might see those terms interchanged. So you have a set responsibilities as a grant manager, but you also spend a very good portion of your time juggling and putting out fires. So juggling, in addition to being responsible for all the things that you see under the responsibilities list, staff, reporting, money, um, any kind of changes, constant interaction with the funder, and any sort of open and close out procedures. In addition to that, you just have things that come up during the day that you have to, sort of shuffle your time and be pretty flexible as a grant manager. The second is putting out fires. This is just code for something bad that happens that you have to commit all of your attention to until it is resolved. So an example might be that there's a break in the supply chain coming into your program that prohibits you from actually doing or providing the services that you said you would. That's a direct violation of your terms and conditions, and the grantor could refuse to pay you for that. So you can see where you would be focusing all of your attention and probably some of your staff's attention to making sure that you resolve that particular issue. So that's really the gist of grant management, is these responsibilities. I'm going to post an example, terms and conditions, and this isn't like getting a parking pass or even setting up a bank account. It's more like buying a house. So the example I have is 33 pages. It is an actual grant that I got, and I was the project administrator on it. You really do have to meet each one of those terms and conditions. If there are any violations of the terms and conditions, or you're not going to be able to meet a deliverable, then you need to let the funder know immediately so you can put in a change request. But you also are responsible for any reporting. There's frequent reporting that's required for the funder. There may be reports that they want that come from some type of analysis that you do. You're in charge of all the money, so you have to make sure that it's being accounted for properly. Sometimes you'll have an accounting person working on your grant, and you can collaborate with them, and they can help a tremendous deal, especially with the money part, but it's still ultimately your responsibility. So if something happens and there's an audit and they find out that $100,000 is missing, you will be the one to go to jail. So we really want to keep everyone out of prison or out of jail. So this is why we take classes like this, so that we know what all the ethics are, what all the issues might be, what challenges you run into, and what to do if you do have a problem. And the best answer for that is just to be transparent and let the funder know immediately that you have an issue. You're also in charge of all the personnel, hiring and firing. One of the portfolio entries we're going to do is where you have to let someone go. It's not easy to do. There are a lot of people who, I guess, don't have the temperament for firing someone. But there are definitely ways to go about it where you protect yourself and you keep it pretty simple, and everyone can walk away with some dignity and no one feels super uncomfortable. So we'll be talking about that later on in the term. So just some things to know about when does grant management actually start. It starts before you get the award. Typically the way the award process works is that you are notified that you will be receiving the money. There's usually a negotiation period of a month or 3 months, and during that time is really when you need to be setting up staff, because if you're providing some type of service, say to homeless veterans for a nonprofit, you are expected to provide those services from day one. You don't get a period of time for you to ramp up. They expect that you're able to do that the first day that you technically have the award. So you're going to start this about 3 months before your project or your program or your intervention or whatever it may be starts. So grant managers do have, there's a continuum of what they're responsible for. So you can have a grant manager who's responsible for every aspect of the project. Those are all the responsibilities I just listed out for you. In most cases, the grant manager has a team. So typically, the first person you're going to hire, if you have a large enough program or project, is going to be a financial person to help take care of the money and record things and do internal audits. It's really, really important that you keep track of the money. You'll be asked at any time, usually on a monthly basis, when you submit your invoices for receipts, for justification on why you spent the money the way that you did. So it's really helpful to have that kind of person on your team. So you could be fully responsible or partially. Now, when I say partially, that simply means that there are some people on your team who take some of the core responsibilities either partially or fully off of your plate. That doesn't mean that you're no longer the person fully responsible for the grant. The grant manager is always the person fully responsible for the grant. For examples, we're just going to use a 12-month grant or project, and that actually involves about 12 to 18 months of actual work, because closeout takes some time, usually after the grant has officially closed. Grant management ends when all the funding has been spent and accounted for, and all the closeout procedures have been followed. Closeout procedures are a little tough because you're sort of tired at that point, and they're typically tedious kind of things that you have to put together for the funder, but they're critically important. If you don't submit them, and if you talk to a grant manager, they'll tell you that we've all been there, where you don't want to do one more thing. You usually are completely out of money, so you're not getting paid for it, but you really have to do it because you'll get blacklisted if you don't do that. And why does a whole course in effective grant management, why is that important? Well, it's really important because you could potentially, if something goes wrong, you could lose funding. Your funder could refuse to pay an invoice. The project could fail. You could have financial liabilities where you yourself or the organization you work for are financially liable for a certain amount of money. So if you do something you're not supposed to do, like throw a gala ball and feed a bunch of people and give them a bunch of booze, your agency that you work for would be responsible for that amount of money. So you can imagine what that might run into, $25,000. Nobody wants to be in that situation because you're probably going to get fired in that particular scenario. Or the worst case scenario is legal troubles. If you just Google like grant managers who have been arrested, you'd be surprised. There are several who have embezzled money, and there's one case in the Midwest, and it was a female. I can't recall her name, but I'll try and remember to put it up. And she embezzled millions of dollars, and she got about 10 years in prison for that. So again, part of the reason we take this class is so that everyone stays out of jail, because sometimes you just do things that you don't know or you're not supposed to do, and there could be potential consequences for that. So just some key terms. For financial arrangements, you're going to see this in probably some of the literature that I posted already. Fixed price simply means that you're going to deliver a product or deliverable, and you will get a certain amount of money for that. So if every week you are feeding 100 homeless vets and it's fixed price, well then whatever the price you agree to, say it's $5,000 a week, it's $5,000 a week. Cost reimbursement, this is where you actually have to itemize all of your expenses. So if you've ever done taxes where you have to itemize, it's like that. So you have to literally get every receipt for everything that you've purchased. You have to produce time sheets for all of your employees, and you to the penny you have to document exactly what you're asking them to reimburse you for. And there is a kind of a combination of fixed price and cost reimbursement, but they're usually one or the other. Most places are moving to fixed price because it's simply easier. There are different types of grants. This isn't particularly important, but just so you know, a capital campaign is simply usually like a fundraising event where you're trying to get funds or capital to launch a project or a nonprofit. Operating grants, they only pay for operating costs. And then there's what most of your grants are going to fall into, and that's a program or project grant. Some are technical assistance. The example terms of agreement that I'm going to post is a training and technical assistance. And then there's planning and bridge grants. So when you take grant writing, or if you haven't already, then we'll talk more about those. But those are just some of the different types of grants that will be coming in that you would be required to manage. Okay, last slide. So just some basic definitions of, now this is more about grant seeking as opposed to grant management, but just to give you a little bit of background, an applicant, this would be probably you as a grant manager. Grant managers do a ton of grant writing. That's where the juggling comes in. This is, you usually work with an organization, either a for-profit, nonprofit, or private sector. Grantee, this is a person that is given the money. A grantor is someone who, or funder is someone who gives money, and funds is money. And match and in-kind. Match is something that the agency or applying agency or grantee brings to the table for the project. It can be either cash, so you may, your agency may agree to kick in $50,000 for a project, or in kind. In kind means goods or services. So let's say you have a project that has 15 volunteers on it, then those volunteer hours would go, they would be an in-kind match. So those are just some terms for grant writing, grant seeking. Covered in the video presentations from here on out, so subsequent chapters. One will be, how do you build in your grant management plan into proposals? And this is helpful for working towards your final product, which is the grant management plan. Negotiating grant awards and procedures. Coordinating grant management activities. This includes audits and monitoring. So there are internal audits and external audits. So there's a big A and a little a. Internal is little a, external is big A. And those you have to be a little more cautious about. Usually when auditors come in, it's because they already have a pretty good idea that there's a problem. Other than that, they're not going to come in and audit you just because. It's not like a random selection. Usually they think there's a problem, they come in and want to look at your books. So doing internal audits, that's with a little a, and just basic monitoring and having a good financial person will really help you out and keep you out of that sort of situation. Evaluation is a core component of all grants or projects, and then closeout procedures. We will also discuss managing different types of grants. It can look very different from, say, the nonprofit sector to the federal monies that you may get. And so there just are some basic differences, and we'll go over those. Finally, we're going to wrap it up with ethics. There are actually codes of ethics for grant managers. And then troubleshooting. So what do you do when you run into a problem? So this is the first basic presentation for Chapter 1. I appreciate you guys listening, and I'll be back with another video in just a few minutes.